Welcome to the Data Chief. I'm your host, Cindy Housen. To kick off our 7th season of the Data Chief podcast, I'm thrilled to bring to you a special episode with 3 leaders shaping the future of data and AI. First, Paul Baier, CEO and co-founder of GAI Insights. Then, Jennifer Belissent, principal data strategist at Snowflake. And finally, Rory Blundell, CEO of Gravitee. We're going to talk about what's really coming in 2026, how agentic AI shows up in everyday work, what you need to do now to get your data AI ready, and how AI will change your APIs and integrations, and so much more. So let's dive in. Hi, I'm Cindy Housen, host of The Data Chief. If you've heard me talk about data and AI before, you know that I believe everyone, not just data teams, should be able to get the insights they trust. That's why I'm proud to say that ThoughtSpot sponsors this podcast. ThoughtSpot's agentic analytics platform lets you simply ask a question in natural language and get clear, governed answers right when you need them. No fuss, no waiting. It's why companies like Cisco, Lyft, Hyatt, and Roche count on ThoughtSpot. See what the future of analytics feels like at ThoughtSpot.com. We'll start off with Paul Baier, CEO and co-founder of GAI Insights. Paul is a software entrepreneur, a leading voice on generative AI, and a contributor to Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Management Review. He brings deep expertise into making agentic AI real for the business. Paul, welcome to the Data Chief.
Thank you, Cindy. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So where are you joining us from today, Paul?
I'm calling from Boston.
Boston.
Yeah.
Cool town. But you were already talking about a super cool place where I used to ski in Europe. Care to give us a hint?
Oh, in Davos we were mentioning. Yeah, it's beautiful. Boy, if you're a skier, that's the place to be. Yeah, we'll be there next month.
It sure is. Exciting times. Well, Paul, tell us a little bit about your journey in AI and why you founded GAI Insights.
Sure. Yeah, my background been 25 years in enterprise software and lived through the dot-com phase. I was with the open market when they went public and then started the dot-com myself, Purchasing Center, way back in 1998. Never thought we'd see NASDAQ as high as it is now. So that was one. And then I spent 5 years at a company called First Fuel, which was using traditional machine learning. So got a really good sense for the power of predictive AI. So when ChatGPT hit, I first got it in December of 2022. It was so clear that this was transformational and that it was immediate, obvious value, not just a cheat tool for kids, which everyone was thinking back in January.
Yeah, well, at ThoughtSpot, we were not thinking of it as a cool tool for kids. It was making what was already easy even easier in terms of getting to the data. But here we are, let's say, just about 3 years later. And I would dare say organizations are really struggling to articulate the value, struggling to figure out directionally which LLM. Even now with Anthropic, they published how their product, the MCP protocols, have been used for espionage.
Yeah.
So what is your take on this? Give us a bold prediction for 2026.
Well, I think the bold prediction, I think even the AI optimist like myself, we underestimated the impact this year. So if you go back to just a year ago, remember, we were barely talking about agents. We thought maybe there'd be 2 or 3 agents out there that'd be in pilots. We thought maybe we'd go from 5% of companies being in production to maybe 20%. We thought maybe the models would get 10, 20% better. Remember, 2 Decembers ago, research just came out with the reasoning model in early December. It shocked the world. They got the deep research model. So it's only been 12 months of even the deep research capabilities here. So we're going to have even more next year, exceeding expectations. So we're going to have a Christmas next year that's going to be full of shopping bots. We're going to start seeing the native AI startups really start having a business impact. And we're going to see valuations of companies that are considered AI native or AI first start to get a valuation premium both by public investors and PE firms. So it's going to become very real in a material sense 12 months from now.
Yeah, so AI shopping bots, the pace of innovation, for sure. It feels like a lifetime ago that I just started using the word agentic AI or an AI agent, and now it's really orchestration. So GAI Insights has a number of resources to help customers navigate this. I want to start by making an observation. I was thrilled to be able to join you in Boston this year at your annual conference, and there definitely was a difference in the maturity of your conference attendees and others if I go to other large conferences. Why do you think that is, or how have you found the companies at the cutting edge?
From the very first day we started this 2.5 years ago, we've really focused on companies in production in the enterprise. So back in September 2023, we were the first conference that was just enterprise only. We had the first buyer's guide for LLM back then here. And we actively seek out and court those early innovators in production. And that ends up being a very different group than most other conferences get. And interestingly, they want to meet others in production because they can't find enough other people typically in their industry that are cutting edge as they are.
For sure. We're all trying to learn in this fast-paced environment. So you mentioned the buyer's guide. Tell us a little bit about that and maybe what surprised you in publishing this year's guide.
Sure. It's called the Corporate Buyer's Guide to, we call Enterprise Intelligence Application. So it's LLM, it's specifically for enterprises. We're updating it every 6 months now. 3 key things we learned in the most recent update. One was how radically different some of the roadmaps were on companies that we had seen just 6 months ago. Some companies have gone from having their own proprietary model to open source. Others went from open source back to proprietary models like RC. Multiple companies had changed their pricing models because they were going to usage-based and not. And a real, so that's the pricing models, and third thing here is a real disparity on who actually has in-production customers. So our grading methodology really weights heavily having public customers being in production, which is very different than just raising a lot of money being a foundation lab. And we really discovered as we dug into NDA, there is certainly set as vendors, a lot more companies in production here. So, and that's only going to continue to extend the lead for these companies.
Yeah. So if we just do a marker and say we're in December 2025, January 2026, what is your industry benchmark of companies in production in the enterprise with agentic AI?
Right now, we're tracking 25% of companies in mid-size to larger have something in production. And that may be something that's at the department level, at the enterprise level, or with employees.
So 25%. And so you've already just, not that I was leading the witness, but I sort of kind of was. You already just demonstrated the difference in maturity. So when you look at the fact base, that's your customer base. I recently attended an A2A summit where Gartner quoted, based on their attendees and webinar polls, their customer base, only 8%.
Yeah.
Only 8%.
Yeah. And at one level, we're a mini Gartner, but we focus on a very different market. Gartner's a great firm, but the vast majority of their customers are those very pragmatic, later adopting companies here, but we're really focused on the ones that are adopting now, and they have executives who have absolute career risk on their $5 to $10 million GenAI budget.
Well, I would also say there's career risk if they are not investing adequately. So it works both ways.
Correct.
Given that there is a big gap between those in production and those that are still investigating, you also have a framework, the WINS framework. Tell us a little bit about this.
It's a framework we at Harvard Business School published back in Harvard Business Review in September 2023. And it's a simple 2x2 chart, but it's been proven very effective in turbulent urgency. And the matrices are, what percent of your cost base is digital products and what percent of those products are actually digitized. And instead of just talking about knowledge workers, we make it a little more specific. We call it WINS: words, images, numbers, and sounds. So if that's the majority of your cost base and it's already digitized, lawyers, accountants, software, enterprise, you are in the crucible. And the crucible means you're going to see 5 to 15% of revenue and profit impacted by GenAI in the next 24 months. So if you're in there and you aren't in production, you're behind. Now, there's other parts where that might be a lot lower percentage of cost base. So maybe a mining company or a company that's got a lot more physical delivery of things, you've got more time to wait. But the WINS framework is a very useful tool for determining urgency and also risk and potential in your particular industry.
Yeah, so if you take that framework and you apply it maybe to one of the speakers or customers that you're allowed to share publicly, give us an example, make it real.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Blue Cross Blue Shield. Insurance is a really good example. That's an industry that is lots of words, images, numbers, and sounds. They've had decades of digitizing that here, and they're going through a tremendous transformation here, both from a competitive standpoint and also from a new entrance. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan is one of the customers that we work with, $35 billion in sales, and Bill Famrich, their EVP and CIO, he's got multiple projects in production. He has 115 agents in production, and he's well ahead of all his peers. And he's already seeing material benefits from that. And one thing that's really important, Cindy, for everyone to realize is that this is different than some of the other technologies. There's a learning curve here that once you learn this with your particular organization, you can forklift that team over to another project and get 80 and 90% of the benefits. The last 30 years of software, you couldn't fork a SAP team over onto a PeopleSoft team and get the same benefits here. So there really is a benefit to being first, and we continue to see that leaders are getting further ahead. There is no fast catch-up.
Yeah. So leaders, I would say they're leapfrogging the laggards, or those that maybe in the last wave, whether it was cloud transformation, digital transformation, those that had fallen behind are able to leapfrog with AI. But I would also dare say those that had already figured out their data strategy, their data modernization, and migrated to the cloud have been better poised to leverage AI. What do you think?
I totally agree, Cindy. We particularly see, if you agree with this, we certainly see that in the regulated industries here. Usually the regulated industries are a little slower to adopt this here, but we've seen a lot of banks, insurance companies, and financial institutions ahead of some of those companies that didn't go through all those years of having data governance and a lot more systematic risk adjustment thinking in their IT investments.
Yeah. So as you bring up regulated industries, and we do a lot with insurers and financial services, but I see a big difference in their approaches to some of these LLMs, where they still want to keep it in their own data centers. They prefer open source versus proprietary. There was this pendulum, small LLMs, large LLMs. What's your take here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it was clear. I mean, everyone did all the pilots with OpenAI and a few others, but it's certainly in production, behind my firewall, in my trust boundaries, obviously critical. Own your own intelligence is the thinking that we're seeing out there. And a lot of these big companies really starting to understand what it means to have the amount of data they have. In the AGI world, and we can debate the definition of AGI, but if you think AGI is somewhat real, or there's 5 to 10% of real, you really do need to ask yourself as a company here, what's the chance that they're going to break those contracts and use my data? And if it's even 5% or 10%, do you even want to take that, particularly if you're in a drug discovery or doing a lot of proprietary training? So for that reasons and others, we're seeing more of this in production inside my trust environment, either virtual private cloud or actually on-prem.
Are you seeing any of the U.S. companies adopting DeepSeek?
I've seen 3 companies do pilots with DeepSeek. We have not seen adopted it. We are seeing around the world people pick up that. And, the open weight or quote open source from China, I mean, those models are very powerful. I think Chinese is playing very savvy game. They're going to the rest of the world, going the Chinese models here. And we may find ourselves 5 or 6 years from now looking at the U.S. closed models having a high percent of market share here in the States, but the rest of the world really having a high percentage of the Chinese open weight models.
Yeah, and as you're heading to Davos soon, what do you expect the biggest differences will be from the EU perspective?
I think the EU has been a caboose, and they're going to continue to be more of a caboose. I mean, it's really unfortunate where they are, and I think this age of AI, because it's moving so fast, gaps between second, third, fourth place become wider, both in terms of companies and industries and countries. And I think we've got pockets of real innovation in Paris and a little bit in London, if you want to stick that here. But boy, the rest of Europe is really lagging. And the talent is coming to the States. I was in Silicon Valley a couple months ago. I was shocked at how many young people I met who left Europe coming to that. So talent is leaving Europe, capital is leaving Europe, and the regulatory environment is not really favorable right now. So Europe is really hitting some headwinds.
Yeah, they are. So, Paul, if you put your consulting hat on, but always through your pragmatic lens, what do you most urgently want business and CDAIO leaders to do in 2026?
I think the first thing they need to really get aligned on get invested in is alignment. There's simply not enough, in our view, company on board level and management team alignment on this. And to get alignment, what I'm talking about is at least I'm going to be specific, a 90-minute meeting where half the meeting you have hands on keyboard so the board members and those executives can understand and use cases that really matter. Because this is something you have to experience. You have to treat AI as a capability and not an IT project. And way too many people are treating it as an IT project. Way many people are putting just 15 minutes on it. Unless you do that as a team, you're not going to calibrate all this noise around it here. So that kind of calibration as a team, both for the potential, but then also your investment level in 2026 is absolutely critical. And we still see less than half the companies even having that on the agenda.
Yeah. So dare I say, this sounds a lot like AI literacy for the leadership teams. Am I putting words in your mouth here?
Absolutely. I mean, and if you're really serious about it, we've got one publicly traded company that's taking our advice. They're doing a day and a half with us and just the top 8 people. And then we're going to roll that down to the top 50 people here. So if you're really serious about a leader of moving your culture from AI being a novelty and a parlor trick to the cultural norm, you have to start there. Secondly is, just as I argue that you shouldn't be allowed to evaluate regular technology if you've never used a browser. Equally, you should not be allowed, in my opinion, to even opine on GenAI investments at your company unless you have personally used these tools for 30 hours yourself. And the vast majority of executives has yet to do that. And that's a disservice to their careers and their companies.
It is. As one CIO said to me, Cindy, how do I stop this management by magazine? And I think you've just given some great insight on how to do that, Paul.
Yeah.
All right, Paul, let's switch to a fun prediction. I don't know, you're from Ohio, but Boston. This could be Patriots. It could be snow. Give us a fun prediction for 2026.
Really, one fun prediction. I've been really impressed with some of the AI generated music here. There's a band that's called Breaking Rust, and Living in Borrowed Time is a early country. It is fabulous. I've listened to that thing 20 times. I think we're going to see 12 months from now, we're going to see at least 3 top 10 songs that are AI generated. And because at the end of the day, people want good music here. They don't care necessarily where the artist is. And that's going to be shocking because we continue to find many, many pockets in our lives where AI is as good or better than the human brain.
Wow, that is bold. And I will be adding that to my playlist. Paul, thank you for being on the Data Chief, but more importantly, for all you do to guide our industry.
Thank you.
Next, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Jennifer Belissent, Principal Data Strategist at Snowflake. Jennifer spent more than a decade at Forrester focused on data leadership and literacy, and she is world-renowned for tracking what it takes for AI to deliver business value. We'll dig into her 2026 predictions on AI-ready data, responsible AI guardrails, and what it really takes to manage agents as they enter the workforce. Jennifer, welcome to the Data Chief.
Thanks, Cindy. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, and where in the world is here today, Jennifer?
Well, here is with you, but I'm actually sitting at home today in the Chamonix Valley in France.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful mountains and ski. And for those listeners who are joining us on YouTube or video, of course, I'm admiring your snowflake bears in the background. Yeah, I have mine.
Yay!
A gift from a snowflake superhero, Sunny Rivera. And whenever I have like nieces visiting, they want to take it. I'm like, no, that's mine.
I have given them as gifts to many people. I love them. I obviously got those two probably to give as gifts, but I haven't been able to part with them. So I keep my pair behind me.
There you go. So they keep company. Yeah. Jennifer, you have had a fascinating career. And you actually just shared something with me in an earlier call. Take us back a little bit to the beginning of how you got started in this space.
So I actually got started in the data space at university. I did an econometrics class, loved it, but then I kind of veered off. And as I tell people, my first job out of university started with a one-way ticket to Bujumbura, Burundi. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I was assigned to the Central African Republic, which is a little bit easier for people to find. There's kind of a clue in the name. Even there, I was a math teacher, but even there, I was also working on data. I ended up working on a World Health Organization program on infant diarrhea. And I was a data entry person. So I got to see that side of things. And then throughout my career, I've always touched data in different ways, either as a user myself and then working with data in my time, both at Sun Microsystems and then obviously as an industry analyst at Forrester before I came to Snowflake. I've been a data person for a long time.
Yeah, you have. So SPSS, it takes me back to my graduate school days. That was our definition of machine learning statistics at that point in time. It certainly has changed, but there are some themes that have remained the same as we go into the AI phase, or let's say agentic AI phase. What are some of those themes that you see as consistent?
One of the biggest themes that I see as consistent is the data itself. I mean, the tools that we are using to analyze it have obviously changed and become much, much more sophisticated. But that sophistication also brings a requirement for much, much more data. And so having the data that's fresh, that's of high quality, that is obviously in many cases secure, those are the kinds of things that really haven't changed. I mean, I experienced that as an end user myself in having data sets that were incomplete or data sets that were just too old and the data wasn't fresh. And that really hasn't changed. The increased reliance on AI, not just for, testing something, but really for running the operations of our organizations, we are much more dependent on having that AI-ready data today.
Yeah. And do you think in your work with leadership teams, are some of them, let's say, chasing the shiny toy or just checking a box? Yes, we have an AI program, but they're underestimating what it takes to have a strong data foundation.
That might have been the case a few years ago, but I think that at least with the organizations that we work with, I think people are increasingly understanding that they, as we say, there's no AI strategy without a data strategy. And we all know the adage of garbage in, garbage out. So those types of messages have really sunk in, and people are focusing on having the data that they need. Now, I think that there's a lot more to be done. I get very excited about the notion of data diversity and data sharing and data collaboration to really broaden the focus, broaden the aperture of where you're getting those sources. So I think that there's still room for improvement, but I think the understanding of having a good, solid data foundation is there.
Yeah. And Jennifer, you had a very important positive here, the organizations that you work with. Of course, working at Snowflake, you have a certain lens. It's organizations that are in the cloud. They have a cloud strategy. They are focused on data. And I would say at ThoughtSpot, I have a same bias for more mature organizations. But maybe as you think about when you go to industry conferences or put your old Forrester hat on, there's still a lot of organizations that do not have a cloud data strategy. And are we leaving them behind, or what's happening to them?
I mean, I wouldn't say we're leaving them behind. They might be a little bit behind, but I think that there's room to bring them in. And there are, we've got partners and that are working with them, working with companies that are maybe smaller or that are maybe less mature. It reminds me of probably 20 plus years ago when, you and I were in the internet space, and we used to look up movie times online, right? I remember going to my parents' house or coming to my in-laws' house and having them pull out a newspaper and look up. Yes. So, there are still, you're right. We're in a world where the level of maturity is high.
Yes.
But I think that the popular news media, you'd have to really be living under a rock to not know that it's out there and available. Now, whether or not people are able to get there at the same, there are going to be different speeds of adoption everywhere, which is one of the things that I actually really like and am proud about Snowflake is, with our being cloud and being consumption based means that you don't have to have a massive capital outlay to try it and to play with it and to learn about what it can do for your business. And so we do see developers signing up for test accounts, and we do see companies using Snowflake for smaller projects. So I think that there is that ability to test and try and not to have to spend a lot in order to get started. So I think that
they can start small. For sure.
We're in a world now where we can scale to people's needs.
Okay.
Down and up.
Yeah, definitely. So heading into 2026, what's the biggest human shift enterprises need to make to truly deliver value from AI?
So I think that there are a couple of things. The first is to teach their employees how to manage it and how to use it. And that means understanding what you're asking of it and being able to monitor what it's giving you and make sure that it continues to deliver what you're asking of it. And that requires, so the manage it is first, and the second is measure it. So that requires, again, knowing what you're asking it, assigning metrics for how you're going to judge how it's doing, and then monitoring and measuring those going forward so that you're able to keep those guardrails, if you will, around what it's doing and how it's delivering. It's interesting because, as I wrote in a blog and in a predictions report, we haven't, I think we as a society, as an industry, we haven't been great at teaching management skills. And that's something that you see in the HR literature. And I think, well, if now we're all going to be expected to manage our own agents, we really have to double down on management. We have to be, the principal to the agent, and we have to be able to tell it what we want it to do and monitor how it's doing and make corrections if we need to.
Yeah. So related to that, then, is this a new skill set, or is this a new role of an AI manager, AI whisperer? What are your thoughts here?
I think it's a new skill set. It's universal. We're all going to need to be AI managers, whether it's, and in particular, because, as AI has evolved, we've gotten used to assistants where we're working really with it. We're asking it something, it's telling us something, we're asking it again. But as these assistants become more autonomous and turn into agents, we need to be able to upfront be clear about what we want it to do and what its job description is and identify the right candidate for that particular job description. So I see it really as very much similar to an HR process of hiring a person. We need a job description. We need our criteria for hiring. We need to find the right candidate, onboard them, and make sure that they're well trained, and then monitor them and do performance evaluations, continuously. So I draw that parallel because I think that we're all going to need to become that manager.
For sure. So give us a bold prediction in 2026 around this. Like, where is this going to go right? Or what will leaders do differently where it might go wrong? And how do we prevent that?
Well, I think where we need to go right is exactly that. I mean, management becomes front and center, and that's management of our AI agents. And where we're not doing that, I think there's going to be a lot more accountability, or that I would hope there's a lot more accountability in where it goes wrong. We need to look for the accountable. Who is that person, and how could we change the way that they've been trained as a manager? It boils down to management. In many cases, and that's how we get the human and the machine. Because we're not going to completely eliminate the human, but they need to know they need to know how to interact as a team.
So the other area that you work on, Jennifer, is on ethics and regulation. As you think about some of the differences in Europe versus other world regions, USA, China, do you expect governance to accelerate AI adoption in 2026 or slow it down?
So my hot take on regulation is that it's an accelerator. It's not a brake. And that's what I've heard from a number of our customers, that requirements like AI literacy, although the EU is backing away from that slightly, it's now much more with governments and national agencies that the AI, that are going to be responsible for AI literacy. But AI literacy is a means of setting expectations. It's what the board should expect from the AI that's implemented. And it's the expectations of the people who are implementing it. And so I think that the AI literacy piece is going to be very important. The other piece that's really important is transparency. And what I've seen and heard from our customers is that transparency as a requirement is not just, is not slowing down adoption. It's actually accelerating it. Because if you're being transparent within your organization, you've got a model registry, catalog of data products, you're starting to see what others in your organization are doing. And we get a little bit of FOMO. We get people who are saying, oh, that's a cool project. I want to be part of it. Or maybe I could apply that model to my data and see what it means for me. Or maybe I can contribute my data into it and improve the accuracy for everyone. And we've seen that across the board. We've seen that. One of the examples that I really love is a retailer who built a model for routing within stores for the pickers of the online orders, the people who went around the store and picked off the shelves.
Right.
And then they reused the same model, or adapting it for their logistics, their delivery. Obviously accelerating the time that it took to create that model for logistics, because they were reusing something that had already been built. So once you start to see that reuse, because of transparency within the organization, you're increasing the value that you're delivering to your organization with incremental cost. It's not that much to adapt a model to another scenario. And so I see transparency as an accelerator. And that transparency, it is part of the EU AI Act. It is regulation, but we see companies adopting it as a means of encouraging collaboration across their organization.
Yeah, and I think that transparency leads to trust. That's why it's also an accelerator. It's not just because of the regulation. I will often describe regulation as the moral minimum and not to wait for it. Don't use it as an excuse. We can't do this until it's regulated. But I will say you and my colleague Jane Smith agree that it will actually be an accelerant to adoption. So I think that's interesting. Jennifer, give us a fun prediction. Could be travel related, sports related. I'm wondering about the cost of the lift tickets in France versus in Colorado. But give us a fun prediction in 2026.
So I'm excited about two things. One, slow travel or no travel as opposed to long haul travel. I keep looking at different destinations, and I I get excited about things that I want to see either in France or in Europe. And so that's what I'm excited about over the coming year, is to really just doing a lot more slow and no travel. But I'm also, in terms of a sports hot take, I'm all in on Cortina 2026. I'm really excited for the Winter Olympics. It's right in my back door. I mean, it's across the Alps in Italy,
Yeah.
but it's not far. And actually, my town is sending a lot of athletes, so I'm really excited to see what happens. There's also a new sport. It's ski mountaineering, skimo, and France has a really strong team. So I'm super excited to see what happens with skimo in 2026. It's the first year it's been an Olympic sport.
Oh, fun. Well, enjoy that front row seat, Jennifer, and thank you for all you do for our industry, but also for being on the Data Chief podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Joining us now is Rory Blundell, CEO of Gravitee, best known for its API management. As a former leader who helped expand SnapLogic across EMEA, Rory brings a front row view of how AI is reshaping API, integration, and event streams. We'll cover the shifts he's seeing and what they mean for scaling AI in 2026. Rory, welcome to the Data Chief.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Cindy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Now, Rory, you and I met for the first time in person, live in New York City at one of the first A2A events. Where are you joining us from today?
I think it was the first A2A event, actually. So to give it its true accolade. Today, I'm joining you from London.
So given that the A2A event was the industry's first, were you surprised by how many people attended and how well it went?
Yeah, I would say I was pleasantly surprised, actually. That's a fair question because obviously Gravitee had a large part to play in hosting the event as well as a company. There's always a part of you which is slightly nervous going into the first one that you've ever, like the first A2A or MCP or whatever it may be event. In some ways I was surprised, in other ways less surprised, because it's clear that the agentic world is just at the forefront of everyone's minds, frankly, at this particular point in time. And so I wasn't surprised from that perspective, but the perspective that I was surprised by was just how much people were feeling this sense of uncertainty, I would say, in how they actually go about bringing these sorts of agentic systems into the real world and true enterprise scale for large scale organizations. And so I think that's what it really tapped into with a lot of people. Is A2A is a sort of byword, if you will, for scale, agents at scale. And I think a lot of people really, really felt quite strongly about that sort of stuff at the event. So yeah, I was surprised in certain ways, but less so in others.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit for those that are earlier in their careers. It's the first time that they are working without a clear playbook. Like everyone is at ground zero trying to figure this out. And so it really is that peer-to-peer learning. You are an industry veteran. As you think about your career in enterprise software, how have some of your experiences in this space shaped how you view AI and really agentic AI now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there's so much that I think about in relation to that, as to how, obviously I look at it primarily through a lens of middleware. So integration, APIs, what AI is really doing to all of these different types of technologies and the technology stacks that you need and all those sorts of things. And so, from my perspective, it's having a phenomenal impact at this particular point in time. And, how I view that is pretty simple, actually. It's touching every single application, every single system, every single user, really. It's not quite there yet. Let's not pretend that it's at that scale yet. But you can see 2025 has been a very, very pivotal year, I would say, from my perspective, because obviously at the end of 24, I think it was mid-November 24, the MCP was even brought about, right? So 2025, as much as we've had AI and all this sort of stuff. So actually a really good way I always think about this is 2025 has been the year of integrating agents, in my view. And next year will be about how do you take that forwards? Because before 2025, without MCP and all these different sorts of mechanisms or protocols, whatever we want to call them, to be able to actually start communicating effectively across agents and across from tools to agents and stuff like this, actually, it's, that there wasn't really a framework for people to be able to do it. And so for me, that's what I really see very deeply when I look at it through the lens of the middleware space, how everything is changing in that regard.
The way you described this to me is, well, of course we had all API to API before, and that was just middleware. It almost made these agent protocols less intimidating, that it's almost just a smarter way of getting these agents to talk to each other. And we used in our annual trends and predictions ebook, we use the analogy of the agentic stack is almost like building a multi-story parking garage.
Okay.
There's the different protocols, different ways of orchestrating.
Yeah.
And for some who maybe are not ready, they have not placed their bets, or they're afraid of the openness of MCP and the vulnerabilities that any of these protocols might introduce. There is traditional APIs, vendor specific. How do you think this will play out in 2026? Where do you think customers will start, and where do you envision they will be towards the end of the year?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. And I think, let me draw on a personal experience I had building agents myself, and actually so I decided to build an agent not too long ago. One of the I say age old, it's only been a year old. So, but one of the use cases many people talk about is like the travel agent, agent, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, well, I travel a lot to be able to go and see customers and, partners and people like that. So I thought, well, let me go and do that. Let me go and actually build one of these things. And I extended it. And when I was going to see a customer, I thought, okay, so let's use this agent as well. I extended the agent a bit and said, look, let's see if it can go and recommend me. I was going to a new city, and let's see if it can go and recommend me a restaurant that is similar to a particular chef that this person who I was meeting, I knew they liked. And then I thought, okay, go and book me a table. And where it broke down is it made the recommendation to me, but it couldn't book the table. And it couldn't, for example, go and pay the deposit to be able to book the table and some of this. Now, that's a very, very simple example. But the reason I use that example is because actually it illustrates quite a lot, I think, what will happen in 2026 and probably the first half of 2027. You spoke about APIs in your question there. Well, what I see is that APIs don't go away with the advent of things like MCP, A2A, all these sorts of things. I see they're additive in actual fact. It's just that tool is the wrong term to use because obviously it's something that it's a sort of loaded term in the AI world. But these protocols or mechanisms of communication are for different user profiles. So if you're talking, for example, about a human user that wants to go and access data for an app, whatever it may be, they will use an API. But in future, the reason MCP was brought about was to give that interconnectivity layer, the layer that gave an abstraction on top of APIs and databases and whatever it may be, so that the LLMs could understand and the agents could understand it more effectively. Now, what I therefore think is that with the rise in agents, you're going to see that, in my view, if we go back to the analogy of booking the restaurant that I just used, it broke down because the restaurants didn't have MCP enabled services to be able to go and book tables. So if you're talking about, for example, like, I don't know, Open Table or whatever one of the, through Google, you can book your table or whatever it may be. In future, rather than that being a human-led interaction, those services will need to be exposed as MCP and later on potentially as A2A as well, so that people can actually start to utilize those through and make the agentic ecosystem more powerful. And that's really one of the key things that I see happening in 2026 is an maturation, so a greater maturity that comes into the market with more people adopting MCP, more people using A2A and things of that nature to enable the agentic ecosystem. Because at the moment, it's fairly limited. You can do it within your own organization if you have a strategy around MCP, but in terms of integrating with other organizations, that's where we need to break that next layer. And security is a very, very important aspect of that.
Security is huge. And it sounds like where the agent you built broke down was it could generate the insights, but not take the action.
Exactly.
And for sure, it's the taking the action where people are, it's a crawl, walk, run with a high degree of anxiety at each of these steps, really. And so it might be that certain actions, the agent, the different platforms will say, we're not ready for that, or it's too risky. As you picture this evolving in 2026, what do you think the need is for having these safeguards to limit the actions? And I haven't come up with a good term here, Rory. Give us a term. Is it an AI watchdog? Is it an AI whisperer? But it's really another agent just watching that, hey, Rory built this agent and he booked 20 tables in my restaurant on the busiest night. And so this is a bad agent. This is not real.
Right.
And we've got to prevent that. What are your thoughts here?
Well, firstly, I'll give you the name for it, at least it says agent management from our perspective.
Okay.
And this is very much a sort of term that Gardner are now pursuing and stuff like that. If you look at some of their literature and stuff like that, there's a new, if you look at one of their more recent reports that suggests a huge growth in a particular market, I think they call it the agent management market. And to my mind, this is the analogy of API management on top of APIs, but for agents, basically. And the foundation of your question, in my view, Cindy, is 100% right. A lot of the points you made were about risk, about fear, about all those sorts of things that people maybe can't get to the level of taking the action. Like I was saying, the thing that really held me back was about taking the action. And it's because of this fear, risk, all these sorts of things. I think you're exactly right. But that's what agent management has to solve in 2026. And that's the key part of it. Because one of the things that you and I spoke about when we were in New York, which I feel very strongly about, is about this... the AI maturity curve that we've built at Gravity in this model that we've built, which really speaks about where organizations are in their maturity curve as an organization with AI. And what we see happening very, very clearly at the moment is the first phase. If I just quickly characterize the 4 phases, and then I'll tell you where people are getting stuck and why AI agent management is so important for this. The first phase is fundamentally about POCs, let's call it. People doing POCs, get your first agent, start to build. What we tend to see in a lot of organizations is people starting to build centers of excellences, like building small teams, for example, that are maybe not full developers, but like they've got some developers in them and stuff like that. The second phase is they start deploying their first agents into production. That's why. So most organizations are not beyond a level 2 maturity at this particular point in time. Even those organizations that you speak to that say, oh, we've got 10 agents in production, those agents, generally speaking, are operating a fairly siloed way. And so what that means is they still operate as sort of, point solutions, like individual agents. And so really, they haven't truly matured beyond phase 2. Phase 3 is when you've got multiple agents that are interconnected. They're actually starting to call each other and share information and stuff like this. And that's where you'll start to see the more action, I think, associated with the point you were saying earlier. And phase 4 is where you've got all of that governed, secured, multi-agent ecosystem, stuff like that. Now, what we're seeing is most organizations that we talk to are somewhere between stages 1 and 2. We see the more advanced are in stage 2. There's a whole load of organizations that are just in stage 1 or even pre-stage 1. Now, what's interesting is that organizations are, to your point, the risk, the fear and some of this, they're not accelerating beyond phase 2 or moving beyond phase 2 because they don't have a framework of security, of governance, of control, to be able to give them confidence, to be able to move towards phase 3 and to be able to move towards an action-oriented environment rather than a informational environment, let's say. And that is the big thing that we have to unlock in 2026. And that's what agent management is really focused on, at least from a Gravitee perspective, is bringing that framework of trust, let's say, to this ecosystem.
Yeah, and I like this maturity model. Rory, we'll link to it in the show notes. But I also would dare say, I'm okay with this. Everyone is learning what this is. They're learning the vulnerabilities. And I have a hypothesis, though. Tell me if you agree or disagree what your findings have been, that the startup companies, the smaller companies, they are more mature than the enterprises because they can go faster. There is maybe a little less risk, a lot less technical debt, and a lot less bureaucracy to get through some of the AI governance review boards. So they're starting with super modern tech stacks and they can run faster. What do you think?
I agree with that. I do agree with that. I think that there are pros and cons, I would say, to that, because I think the fact that they don't have the starting point of a lot of tech debt, let's call it, like, huge technology stacks that are maybe spread between different clouds, on-premise, all these different sorts of places. But equally, in order to get the value, I think, for this next generation of services and things that we have to provide, I still think you have to be able to tap into a lot of the data and the knowledge and the experience and all the sort of stuff that is in these big legacy on-premise multi-cloud architectures and all this sort of stuff. So I don't think that tomorrow a lot of these big organizations are just suddenly going to fall off a cliff because they've got tech debt. What they need to solve, and the big thing that I talk to organizations about, is I think that these organizations are on a collision course at the moment between the new world and the old world. They've got all of this knowledge and data and value, frankly, in these old world systems, let's call it. The challenge that they've got is that these new entrants that can move faster than them, exactly as you just described, these greenfield, new tech stacks, all that sort of stuff. What they need to be able to do is leverage the value that's in their systems in a secure, governed way, not to throw out all of their principles of enterprise architecture, security, governance, control, SDLC, all this sort of stuff. Because I think that's what we're seeing a lot of stuff, in my view, what we're seeing a lot of at the moment is these teams that get spun up in the middle of phase 1 of the maturity curve. Because of pressure from C-suite and stuff like this, we can see at times there's a bit of an attitude to riding roughshod over a lot of the core principles that we've built over the last 20, 30 years around software development and stuff like this. And it introduces a lot of risk. And that actually ultimately slows organizations down by circumventing those. And my view is what these older, bigger organizations have to do is embrace things like agent management, the security frameworks, all this sort of stuff, to basically find that harmonious balance between new world and old world. And that's why I say collision course, because that's what agent management is all about trying to solve, is provide that harmonious future between this old world and new world.
Okay, so Rory, give us a bold prediction for 2026. And maybe how do we navigate or avoid this collision? Or is it going to be, okay, here's the collision that will take everyone by surprise?
I think, my prediction is that companies that adopt robust security frameworks in 2026 will be the companies that accelerate fastest. That is my prediction. I think those organizations that really embrace the core principles of enterprise architecture, security, governance, control, most importantly, that learn how to apply that in an agentic world will be the ones that ultimately win and will have first mover advantage, in my opinion. That is my prediction. Those companies that can really lock into that, they will be the first winners.
Any companies that you think we should be watching that you're allowed to mention publicly?
Yeah, good question. Certainly companies like Telium, for example, in the marketing space are doing amazing things in relation to this sort of thing. So yeah, they're doing some amazing things in the marketing space. They're one of the first ones off the top of my mind that I can think about. There's some very, very large fast food organizations who unfortunately I can't mention, but There's loads and loads of organizations that I can think about that are doing amazing things in this space.
Same. Awesome. All right, Rory, give us a fun prediction. Could be travel, could be sports.
A prediction? Maybe is the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup, is that next year? I think it may be. Maybe England wins the Soccer World Cup. There you go.
New York.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Oh,
it's
and maybe it'll happen in New York. There you go.
Exactly. Maybe or maybe not England. This is a very bad prediction, but maybe or maybe not England will win the World Cup in the US. I'm going to say maybe. Maybe they will. I'm going to say they will.
Rory, thank you so much for being on the Data Chief podcast.
Yes, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you. And thank you to all the people behind the scenes who have made this possible. It was an absolute pleasure and lovely speaking to you. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you to our 3 leaders for sharing their insights. I hope you've gotten actionable insights and inspiration from them. If you want to go deeper on the trends shaping 2026, be sure to grab a copy of the ebook, The Top Data and AI Trends of 2026. It's linked in our show notes. Also, subscribe to The Data Chief on your favorite podcast platform and connect with me on LinkedIn or on X at BI Scorecard. If you're loving the show, please rate or review it so others can find it as well.